Have you ever paused to consider if the very act of creating something, a meticulously crafted story maybe, or a resonant poem, or even an entire fictional world, is not just, an artistic endeavor, but actually a profound way of knowing something? Or if perhaps the most profound philosophical truths can only truly be graphed, truly understood, when we actively build them into being, shaping them with our own hands, or, well, more accurately for our discussion today, with our words.
Yeah, it's a really compelling thought, isn't it? That making and knowing are somehow deeply intertwined, two sides of the same coin, maybe.
Exactly. Welcome to AI History of Western Philosophy,
where we journey through the philosophical landscape, illuminated by the insights of artificial intelligence.
Before we embark on this particular exploration today, we do want to share an important note with you.
Yes, AI-generated content, specifically this podcast, confabulates, which means it can present ideas as fact, sometimes inventively.
Right. And though our subject is philosophy, we want to be clear. We are not philosophers ourselves.
AI History of Western Philosophy's mission, really, beyond hopefully pointing you towards the original sources, is to experiment with philosophy as raw material and maybe generate some new possibilities for thought along the way.
So today, we're embarking on a really fascinating exploration into an archetype that has resonated across millennia. The philosopher-artist. These are thinkers who aren't satisfied with merely, articulating abstract ideas. Instead, they pour their deepest philosophical convictions directly into creative works.
Purposefully blurring those lines, right? Between systematic thought and artistic expression.
Right.
Which often get kept pretty separate.
They really do. We'll be immersing ourselves in the lives and works of two extraordinary figures, separated by more than 2,000 years, yet somehow profoundly united by this dual commitment to both philosophy and art.
And what's remarkable here is that while both William H. Gass, towering 20th century American novelist and philosopher, and Ion of Chios, a multifaceted 5th century BCE pre-Socratic philosopher and poet, while they both embody this archetype, their methods, the very nature of the relationship between their philosophy and their fiction were profoundly shaped by the distinct historical contexts they inhabited.
That's a key point.
Yeah, and it invites us to ask a crucial question, I think. Is fiction just like a convenient vessel for philosophical ideas? Or does philosophy sometimes emerge as a retrospective rationalization, maybe, of truths first discovered, perhaps even intuitively, through the creative process itself?
Ooh, that's a vital distinction, isn't it? And one we'll definitely be exploring in depth. Our exploration today is going to reveal that for figures like Gass and Ion, that boundary isn't just permeable. It's often basically non-existent.
Right.
Each practice, in their hands, deeply informs and even, you could argue, constitutes the other.
It's a dynamic thing.
It really is. We're looking at a dynamic, evolving interplay, a constant back and forth between poiesis, that ancient Greek term for the act of making or creation.
And episteme, the rigorous pursuit of knowledge and understanding.
Exactly. So prepare for some truly illuminating insights, I hope, into how the act of making things can serve as an indispensable form of philosophical investigation.
William H. Gass, the architect of worlds from words, the modern agonistic model.
Okay, so to begin our exploration into this incredible intersection of creativity and philosophy, let's first focus on William H. Gass, a towering intellectual figure of the 20th century.
Absolutely, a giant.
Gass represents what we might call a modern, almost agonistic model of the philosopher-artist.
Agonistic, yeah, like a struggle.
Exactly. Like, he approached his creative work as a kind of intellectual wrestling match, actively pushing against those rigid academic and artistic boundaries that had, by the 20th century, increasingly separated philosophy from art.
Which was definitely the trend, wasn't it? Specialization.
Totally. His work emerged into a world of intense academic specialization, where those lines between philosophy and fiction weren't just drawn, but often felt, etched in stone. And his core conviction was truly radical, I think, even revolutionary for its time. Fiction, for Gass, isn't just influenced by philosophical ideas. It becomes a direct performative enactment of them. He wasn't just interested in writing novels about philosophy.
Right, that would be too simple, maybe.
His ambition was to write novels that were philosophy in a way that maybe traditional discursive philosophical treatises just couldn't achieve.
That's a huge claim.
It is. And this vision directly challenged centuries of literary tradition, which often viewed fiction as primarily mimetic, reflecting reality.
Holding the mirror up.
Exactly. The truly groundbreaking idea at the heart of Gass's work is this: Language doesn't merely reflect or describe an already existing reality. It actively constitutes it.
That's the core. Language makes the world.
Yes. So for him, his fiction wasn't just illustrative. It was the necessary laboratory, the crucible, for a philosophy that couldn't really be proven through abstract argumentation alone.
It needed to be built.
It needed to be built, experienced, inhabited to be truly understood. He famously stated that for him, the sentence is the ultimate reality.
Wow.
And the novel is a world made of words. This perspective fundamentally challenges traditional notions of storytelling, doesn't it? Moving beyond mere representation to active, deliberate construction.
Absolutely. Imagine trying to build a world not out of, bricks and mortar or even computer code, but purely out of sentences, vocabulary, syntax, rhythm.
That's Gass's project right there.
To really get the scale of Gass's literary project, we absolutely need to look at his philosophical foundations.
Right.
Because he started there.
Right. He was a philosopher first, in a way.
Yeah, his academic journey began as a philosopher of language, and this was really the bedrock upon which everything else was built. His doctoral dissertation, titled A Philosophical Investigation of Metaphor, became the grounding for this lifelong obsession he had with understanding how language generates meaning.
And not just what it means, but how it means.
Precisely. What's crucial here is that he wasn't looking at language as, like, a transparent tool to describe things that are already out there, but rather as a complex system that creates meaning through its own internal structures, the relationships between words. It's very architecture.
Okay.
And this deep dive into language, it evolved into his mature philosophy, which, as you said, fundamentally rejected that mimetic tradition of realism in literature.
Right, the mirror idea.
Yeah. For Gass, the idea that fiction should hold a mirror up to nature was not only limiting, but, he thought, philosophically unsound. He insisted that a literary work is a self-contained verbal artifact, not some kind of window onto the external world.
Self-contained, like its own universe.
Exactly. He repeatedly stated that fiction does not present actual life at all and cannot be, because, in his typically provocative way, he thought that would be as mundane and boring as life itself.
Okay.
So instead, the author, acting as this sort of sovereign creator within their own verbal universe, constructs what Gass termed a philosophically adequate world.
A philosophically adequate world. I love that phrase.
It's great, isn't it? And this world, crucially, is not made of menacing volcanoes or actual human emotions, as he put it.
No. What's it made of, then?
It's made of menacing phrases, complex chains of concepts, and even the feelings sentences have as they, move across our consciousness when we read.
Wow. So for you, the listener, this offers a really unique perspective. It's about how abstract concepts, the very stuff of philosophy, can become the tangible building blocks of a vibrant fictional reality.
Absolutely. And this radical stance led him to coin the term metafiction in his really pivotal 1970 essay, Philosophy and the Form of Fiction.
Metafiction. Okay, break that down a bit.
Well, to put it in context, the 20th century saw this huge shift in philosophical thought, often called the linguistic turn.
Right, focus on language.
Exactly. Philosophy started shifting its focus from, say, the relationship between mind and world to the relationship between language and world. Language wasn't seen anymore as just a neutral medium for conveying thought.
No, it became active.
It came to be understood as an active, powerful force that actually constructs reality itself, how we perceive it, how we categorize it, how we understand it.
Okay.
And Gass saw the profound implication of this. If reality itself is fundamentally a linguistic construct, then fiction, the art form that explicitly and consciously builds worlds entirely from language, becomes the quintessential model, right? The perfect demonstration for understanding the nature of reality.
So fiction becomes the key.
In a way, yes. Therefore, metafiction, which is fiction that draws attention to its own status as an artifact, explores the relationship between literature and reality. It isn't just some clever literary game.
It's more serious than that.
For Gass, it was a profound philosophical inquiry into the very nature of being. It demonstrates how worlds come into existence through words.
So if language is constructing reality, what does this actually mean for his novels? Like in practice, you might expect, dry philosophical treatises disguised as stories.
Yeah, philosophy with characters tacked on.
Exactly. But Gass takes a much more daring approach, doesn't he? He doesn't just discuss philosophical ideas within his stories. He makes his stories become the philosophy.
Performative enactment, like you said.
Yes. His major fictional works serve as these rigorous case studies where philosophical tenets aren't merely illustrated but are performatively enacted. The very form and structure of his novels is the philosophical argument itself.
Which demands a lot from the reader.
It really does. It demands you engage on a completely different, almost experiential level.
Let's maybe look at his first novel, Omensetter's Luck.
This book dramatizes a fundamental philosophical conflict. The tension between, on one hand, a kind of pre-linguistic, instinctual state of being embodied beautifully by the character Brackett Omensetter's unselfconscious ease and intuitive connection to nature.
Right. Almost like an animal grace.
Yeah, exactly. Versus, on the other hand, a world saturated and defined by language, by self-consciousness, and a kind of intellectual torment, which we see in the figure of Reverend Jethro Ferber.
The man of words.
The man of words. And it's here that we find a truly fascinating insight. Gass, somewhat provocatively, I think, deemed Ferber the man most thoroughly worded, consumed by his own interpretations and linguistic struggles, the novel's true hero.
That seems counterintuitive. Why Ferber?
Well, because Ferber, in his linguistic torment and his desperate attempt to define and categorize the world through words, represents the complex, constructed, and uniquely human reality that is central to Gass's philosophy.
Ah, so the struggle is the point.
Exactly. Omensetter, by stark contrast, remains this sort of blank wall, unassimilable by language, existing outside the very linguistic constructions that define human experience for Gass. He's like a natural force, a puzzle, but not a fully human subject in Gass's philosophical framework.
Okay, that makes sense. He's outside the system Gass is exploring.
Right. Then we move to The Tunnel, often considered Gass's magnum opus and perhaps the ultimate metafictional experiment.
The beast of a novel.
It really is.
Yeah.
The protagonist, William Frederick Kohler, he's a historian struggling with this insurmountable task, writing the introduction to his monumental scholarly work on the Holocaust.
Right, guilt and innocence in Hitler's Germany.
Yes. But instead of writing, he finds himself compulsively digging a tunnel out of his basement. And simultaneously, he begins composing this sprawling, chaotic, deeply personal text that he then literally hides, physically, between the pages of his formal academic manuscript.
Wow.
Okay, let's really break down this choice. The structure isn't just some literary conceit. It's a powerful physical metaphor for Gass's entire philosophy.
The tunnel beneath the text.
Exactly. It suggests that beneath the seemingly objective linear surface of any historical narrative, or indeed any outward presentation of self, lies the chaotic, subjective, but possibly real incoherence of the inner self. A self constructed from fragmentary, often contradictory linguistic impulses.
So the hidden text is the real self, maybe?
Or at least a more real representation of his chaos. The novel's ambition is to basically demolish conventional linear narrative conventions entirely. It aims instead to create a new kind of coherence.
But not based on plot.
No, not based on plot, but on things like thematic resonance, intricate linguistic association, and even musical principles. He drew inspiration from systems like Schoenberg's 12-tone technique.
Right, where the structure comes from the relationships between all the notes, not a central key.
Precisely. Creating this unique yet structured kind of dissonance and relationship between parts. So reading The Tunnel isn't about conventionally learning about the history of fascism. It's about experiencing the philosophical truth that self, history, and world are fundamentally chaotic, subjective constructs of language.
It forces you to live inside that idea.
It really does. It allows you, the listener, to not just read about ideas, but to live them through the challenging, immersive experience of the text itself.
And he kept doing this, right? Integrating philosophy so directly?
He did. Even in later works like the short story collection Cartesian Sonata, we see an even more explicit influence. The very structure of the book, its architecture, is explicitly based on René Descartes' foundational metaphysical problem of the three substances.
God, mind, and matter.
God as uncreated substance, and mind and matter as created substances, along with that enduring philosophical challenge of how they interact.
The classic mind-body problem, basically.
Right. And each novella in the collection is meticulously designed to represent one of these Cartesian substances. It makes the philosophical problem not just an inspiration, but the literal, explicit blueprint for the entire work of fiction.
That's stunning. The philosophy is the structure.
It's a stunning example of how philosophy can not only inspire, but fundamentally structure and organize a creative endeavor, turning fiction into a direct philosophical argument.
So this raises an important question, though. Was the influence purely unidirectional, like philosophy dictates the fiction?
Good question.
Not at all, actually. What's truly insightful about Gass's process is its profoundly dialectical nature. While his rigorous philosophical training undeniably provided the initial conceptual blueprint for his fiction,
Yeah.
the actual painstaking act of building worlds out of words, the wrestling with what he so eloquently called the bones, blood, and flesh of writing, that process expanded, complicated, and significantly enriched his philosophical views.
So the writing fed back into the thinking.
Exactly. It was a constant, dynamic feedback loop. Practice informed theory, and theory, in turn, refined practice.
Can you give an example of that feedback loop?
Yeah, a prime example is the evolution of his understanding of metaphor. In his doctoral dissertation, his view of metaphor was relatively constrained, treating it primarily as a linguistic phenomenon, a relationship between a subject and a predicate within a single sentence.
Okay, fairly technical.
Right. But his practical lived experience in constructing these complex fictional worlds where language operates on so many interconnected and multi-layered levels, it led him to a much more expansive and sophisticated view.
How so?
Well, he later acknowledged that you can make metaphors by juxtaposing objects and in lots of other ways. This wasn't just a minor tweak, it signaled a profound shift. It suggested that metaphor wasn't simply a feature of a sentence, but maybe a fundamental structural principle of reality itself, affecting the very way his fiction related to the world it so meticulously constructed.
Wow, so the act of writing fiction actually changed his core philosophy of language.
It seems like it broadened it, absolutely. And his own interviews offer more light on this. He often noted that fiction, because it has, as he put it, no reason to be written in the way academic essays often do with commissions and deadlines.
Right, no external pressure in the same way.
It allowed him a unique freedom. It permitted him to be more outrageous or daring in his explorations. So fiction served as this distinct and invaluable space for riskier, less systematically constrained, perhaps more intuitive philosophical inquiry than his formal essays might allow.
A philosophical playground, almost.
Kind of, yeah. A space for experimentation without the strictures of academic argument. And furthermore, he consciously imported his teaching methods directly from his philosophy classroom into his fiction.
How did he do that?
He described his approach as one where readers are attractively led, seduced deeper into until they suddenly find themselves agreeing with something they don't want to agree with, and they are required to philosophically retrace their steps.
Whoa, that's manipulative almost, but in an intellectual way.
It's masterful. It transforms the very act of reading, his often challenging, dense prose, into a demanding philosophical exercise in itself. It's a challenge that tests us, he said, and demands our ardent whole participation. It forces you to critically engage with ideas that might initially make you uncomfortable.
Ultimately deepening your philosophical understanding through that immersive literary experience, it's a real intellectual workout.
Definitely.
Ion of Chios, reconstructing a worldview from fragments of poetry and prose. The ancient integrated model.
Okay, so having explored Gass's intricate modern approach, that sort of agonistic weaving of philosophy into the very fabric of his fiction, it's now time to turn our gaze way, way back in time.
Millennia back.
To an era where the intellectual landscape was fundamentally different. Imagine a world where the boundaries between poet, historian, philosopher, they just weren't rigidly conceived yet.
A very different mindset.
Totally. This is the world Ion of Chios inhabited more than 2,000 years ago. Now, understanding his intellectual contributions requires a speculative but rigorous reconstruction, because unlike Gass, where we have the complete works...
Right, we have so little of Ion. Fragments.
Exactly. We're largely dealing with the fragmentary survival of Ion's prolific output, which adds this compelling layer of intellectual detective work to our exploration, doesn't it? Trying to piece together a coherent picture from scattered clues.
It's like philosophical archaeology.
I like that. But even from these precious fragments, Ion emerges as a figure representing a really different model, an integrated, predisciplinary model of thought, where a single cosmological principle seems to have informed and unified this wide array of his literary and intellectual activities.
Indeed. At the very heart of Ion's thought, as far as we can tell, we find this profound principle articulated in the few surviving fragments of his only known philosophical prose work, Triagmos.
Triagmos, meaning triad or threesome, right?
Exactly. And the most crucial of these fragments declares what appears to be a universal principle governing his entire worldview. The beginning of my work is, everything is three, and nothing more or less than these three. The virtue of each thing is a triad: intelligence, strength, luck.
Everything is three. That's quite a statement.
It is. It seems to have served as both the cosmological foundation for how he understood the universe and the ethical core of his philosophy, a really holistic framework for existence.
And scholars connect this focus on three to
Pythagorean leanings, which makes sense. It situates Ion within the broader intellectual currents of the 5th century BCE. This was the era of the pre-Socratics, remember?
before Socrates, Plato, Aristotle.
Right. Philosophers vigorously seeking to identify a fundamental principle and arch that governed the entire cosmos. Thales had water, Anaximander the Eabren.
And Ion had the number 3, the triad.
Exactly. For Ion, this archa seems to have been the triad, and wasn't just like a numerical curiosity. It was apparently a comprehensive way of understanding the very fabric of existence, from the biggest cosmic stuff down to the smallest human action.
How did he develop that? Do the fragments tell us more?
Well, another fragment says, luck that differs greatly from art creates many things that are like it. This seems to develop the triad in a more practical sense.
Luck versus art?
Yeah, it suggests his philosophical interest in the intricate relationship between chance, what the Greeks called tish or luck, skill, or techne, which is related to intelligence and craftsmanship,
Okay.
and power, or dynamis, which translates to strength or innate ability. These seem to be the three components: intelligence, strength, luck.
That helps connect those abstract concepts directly to practical life. You can sort of see that playing out.
Absolutely. Imagine like a master craftsman. Their finished work, the art or techne, is born from a combination of their intelligence in design and technique, their strength or skill in execution, and sometimes, a bit of luck, finding the perfect piece of wood maybe, or just having a good day.
It's a dynamic interplay.
An interplay that Ion, it seems, saw everywhere.
And this is where we truly see the profound integration of his thought, right? Because Ion was famously celebrated in antiquity for his remarkable versatility, his polyidea.
Yes, that captures it perfectly. His expansive creative genius.
And this wasn't just, dabbling. He produced works across nearly every known genre of his time. Tragedy, satyr play, lyric poetry, elegy, dithyrambs,
Choral odes, yeah.
local history, even biography. It's an incredible range.
It really is. And it wasn't dilettantism or an inability to specialize. It was actually a testament to his integrated, universalizing worldview, a living demonstration of his philosophical conviction.
Because this was a pre-disciplinary era?
Exactly. That's absolutely crucial to remember when thinking about Ion. This was long before the academic fields were solidified by Plato or Aristotle.
So philosophy, poetry, history, they weren't separate boxes yet.
Not at all. In the intellectual landscape of the pre-Platonic world, those boundaries simply weren't fixed or distinct. Poetry and early prose were the primary vehicles for all forms of intellectual inquiry, for sharing ideas, exploring the human condition, speculating on the cosmos.
So his versatility was almost necessary.
It was a logical, maybe even necessary consequence of his universalizing philosophy. It was the living proof that the same fundamental principle, his triagmos, could be observed, explored, and expressed through the specific lens of a tragic play, or the personal reflection of a memoir, or a philosophical treatise.
So his ability to move across genres was in itself a kind of philosophical statement.
I think so, yeah. Demonstrating the universality of his core principle.
Can we see that triagmos' influence in the fragments of his creative works?
We can, yeah. His tragedies, for instance, like Phoroi, the Guards, they weren't just retellings of myths. They seem to have engaged with and reimagined the revered Homeric epic tradition.
How so?
Well, imagine how Phoroi might have dramatically explored moments where a hero's intelligence failed them despite their immense strength, or where sheer luck overturned even the most carefully laid plans. It would make the ancient narrative a vibrant, living demonstration of the triagmos in action.
Turning myth into a philosophical laboratory in a way.
Exactly. What philosophical questions might Ion have been asking by reinterpreting, say, Achilles' rage or Odysseus' cunning through the dynamic interplay of intelligence, strength, and luck? It transforms the myth.
And other genres, too.
Yeah, even his sympathetic elegies, which were often performed at aristocratic drinking parties. We know of one written for a Spartan king, which almost certainly celebrated political strength and the luck of a prosperous feast, all framed by the poetic intelligence of its composition.
You can really see how the triad could infuse different contexts.
Absolutely. And even works where only the title survives, like his hymn De Kairos, point directly to his philosophical core.
Kairos, The opportune moment.
Precisely. That ancient Greek concept of the opportune or critical moment, that perfect fleeting window for action, it's exactly where intelligence, strength, and luck must converge for a successful outcome.
So the hymn was probably a poetic embodiment of that key philosophical idea.
Almost certainly. A creative expression demonstrating its practical, everyday relevance.
Now, you mentioned prose memoirs earlier.
Yes, the episteme. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the most potent fusion of Ion's creative and philosophical impulses likely occurred in these prose memoirs. Episteme literally means visits or travels.
And this was really early for memoir.
It might well represent the earliest example of the memoir genre as we understand it today. It wasn't just a diary. It seems to have been a collection of literary philosophical portraits of the great men of his age: Cimon, Pericles, Aeschylus, Sophocles.
Wow. Like Plutarch, but much earlier.
Kind of, yeah. This was, in essence, Ion's way of doing philosophy through observation and narrative.
How was it philosophical inquiry?
Well, through these vivid anecdotes and character sketches, Ion was conducting a sophisticated form of philosophical inquiry. He was mapping the intellectual and political landscape of his world, not through abstract arguments, but through concrete examples drawn from human lives and actions.
Okay, give me an example.
For instance, his critical portrait of Pericles is interpreted by scholars as a philosophical argument in itself. It seems to subtly reflect Ion's own aristocratic, maybe even oligarchic, worldview in opposition to Pericles' democratic nationalism.
So he's using Pericles' life story to make a philosophical point about politics or leadership.
Exactly. It's philosophy enacted directly through narrative and character analysis, showing his ideas in action, demonstrating the political and ethical implications of his worldview through the actions of historical figures.
Any other examples?
Another compelling one is his account of a young Socrates visiting Samos with the pre-Socratic philosopher Archelaus, who was a student of Anaxagoras.
Wow, Socrates before he was Socrates.
Pretty much. This suggests a deep and personal engagement with the very development of philosophical thought itself. It offers us this rare pre-Platonic glimpse into the intellectual ferment that would soon define Western philosophy.
You can imagine Ion using these encounters to explore how maybe intelligence in bait or luck in finding the right teacher shaped the philosophical paths of these figures.
Precisely. Using his triagmos as a lens to understand intellectual history as it was happening.
But this raises an important, almost sad question, doesn't it? Why don't we know more about these works, especially the episteme, if they were so central?
It's a great question, and yeah, it is kind of tragic. The fragmentary survival of Ion's work, unfortunately, reveals a profound historical bias that significantly obscures this ancient integrated relationship between philosophy and literature.
How so? What bias?
Well, we possess more fragments of his tragedies than his more personal prose, simply because tragedy retained institutional relevance. It was more widely copied, studied, performed in later antiquity.
It fit the curriculum, basically.
Right. Whereas genres like memoirs and sympodic poetry, well, they fell out of fashion, were deemed less important for preservation, and were subsequently lost over time due to the, sheer chance of textual transmission.
So it's just an accident of history that we have less of the stuff that might show his philosophy most clearly.
Largely, yes. This accident of textual transmission has, in effect, artificially separated his literary and philosophical selves in our modern perception. It creates a sharper division in our understanding than likely existed in his own unified reality.
So the very works most evident of his philosophy-fiction interplay, like the episteme, are the ones we've mostly lost.
Ironically, yes. It creates this poignant reminder of how historical chance shapes our knowledge and our perception of intellectual history. It's like, as I said, only having scattered bricks from a magnificent palace and trying to reconstruct its full glory.
A sobering thought.
A tale of two eras, comparing gas and ion.
So when we bring these two extraordinary figures together, William H. Gass from the fragmented, specialized 20th century, and Ion of Chios from the unified, nascent intellectual world of ancient Greece, what profound truths emerge.
It's a really telling comparison, isn't it?
It really is. Their comparison reveals not a single static relationship between philosophy and fiction, but an evolving, dynamic one, profoundly shaped, as you said, by their respective historical contexts.
Context is everything here.
Their stories offer us this clear comparative framework, highlighting key distinctions in, their primary works, their core philosophical concepts, their stance on reality, the main direction of influence between philosophy and fiction, and critically, the very function of fiction as a philosophical tool for each of them.
It's a powerful illustration of how external circumstances don't just influence, but fundamentally mold intellectual and creative pursuits. Yeah, and what's genuinely illuminating, I think, is how the direction and nature of that influence between philosophy and fiction differed so profoundly between gas and ion. It creates what we can maybe think of as a dialectical versus a permeating model.
Okay, dialectical versus permeating. Unpack that.
Well, gas, as we discussed, operated in a modern world marked by intense academic specialization. Philosophy and fiction were institutionally distinct disciplines, often even seen as rivals, right?
Right, living in different departments.
Exactly. His work, therefore, shows this clear, conscious, almost explicit dialogue between these two realms. His formal philosophy would pose a problem, like the nature of metaphor or the mind-body problem.
Okay.
Then his fiction becomes the experimental space, the lab, to performatively work through that problem, pushing its limits, exploring its consequences in a way formal argument couldn't.
Right.
And crucially, the results of that creative performance then feed back into and enrich his philosophical understanding, like we saw with his evolving view on metaphor.
So it's a loop, back and forth.
Exactly. That's the modern dialectical feedback loop between distinct yet deeply interconnected intellectual fields.
Okay, so that's gas's dialectical model. What about ion?
Ion, by stark contrast, operated in a predisciplinary world. Those rigid distinctions just didn't exist in the same way. His triagmos posits this single universal principle that he believed governed all things, a foundational truth for cosmos and action.
Right, everything is three.
Yeah. And what's truly fascinating here is that this principle doesn't seem to need to dialogue with his poetry in the same explicit back-and-forth way Gas's philosophy dialogues with his fiction.
Why not?
Because for Ion, the poetry is simply another medium for its expression. But the philosophy doesn't interact with his creative acts as some separate entity. Instead, it permeates every single creative act.
Ah, so it just flows through everything he makes.
Exactly. From the structure of a tragedy to the post in a drinking song. It represents a unified worldview expressed in multiple forms, not a conversation between separate intellectual domains. His art was a natural, seamless extension of his philosophical understanding.
An embodiment of the triagmos.
An embodiment of the triagmos in every genre he touched. That's the permeating model.
Okay, that distinction is really clear. Let's dig deeper then into this core difference. How did fiction actually function for each of them as a philosophical tool?
Yeah, the job it did for them.
Right. For Gas, it seems fiction was deeply exploratory. It was this unique, non-linear tool to delve into ideas, to test premises, to experience truths that were maybe otherwise inaccessible to formal philosophy, which, typically proceeds through linear argument, logical steps.
Step A leads to B, leads to C.
Exactly. A philosophical treatise can argue that language constructs reality, for example, but maybe it can't demonstrate this truth in a visceral, experiential way. It can't let the reader truly feel and comprehend its implications in the same way.
You can state the idea, but Gas wanted you to live it.
Precisely. And this is where Gas of anti-mimetic, self-referential metafiction becomes the necessary laboratory for this kind of exploration. It allowed him to ask these profound what-if questions.
What if a world were made only of sentences?
Yeah. What if consciousness were rendered as a chaotic, non-linear text, like the experience of reading the tunnel? And crucially, he didn't just pose these questions, he meticulously built that world for the reader to inhabit and experience, to wrestle with the implications directly.
So when you read Gas, the words themselves feel like the atoms of that fictional universe. You're witnessing its creation.
Exactly. So for Gas, fiction wasn't just entertainment or instruction. It was a fundamental mode of philosophical discovery, a way of performing philosophy.
Okay, so Gas explores, discovers. What about Ion's function?
For Ion, on the other hand, it seems fiction was more profoundly a tool for expression and exemplification.
Showing rather than discovering.
Kind of. His tragedies, elegies, histories, they likely weren't asking what is the nature of the cosmos in a direct, investigative, or maybe deconstructive sense like Gas. Instead, they would have been showing and demonstrating. Like, here is how the triadic nature of the cosmos, that dynamic interplay of intelligence, strength, and luck, plays out in the lives of heroes, or in the rise and fall of cities, or in the joyous celebration of a feast.
Making the abstract concrete.
Exactly. His art served to embody, to celebrate, and to transmit a philosophical vision he had already articulated, presumably in his prose work, the triagmos. It made abstract principles like the triagmos concrete, culturally resonant, and emotionally immediate for his audience.
So it's more about teaching or sharing the known truth.
Yeah. So for Ion, fiction was primarily a mode of philosophical instruction and dissemination, making his worldview accessible and tangible through narrative and poetic forms, rather than strictly a site of new philosophical discovery itself, in the way it seems to have been for Gass.
Two very different ways for art to serve philosophy, or perhaps be philosophy.
Precisely, shaped entirely by their times. Outro.
So if we connect all this to the bigger picture, the profound comparison between William H. Gass and Ion of Chios really reveals a powerful and nuanced truth, doesn't it? There isn't just one singular, static relationship between philosophy and fiction. Instead, it's this evolving, dynamic interplay, powerfully shaped by its specific historical and intellectual context.
Context is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whether fiction acts as a radical laboratory for exploring new ideas, like with Gass, or serves as a vibrant canvas for embodying existing truths, like perhaps with Ion, it consistently functions as a crucial way of grappling with humanity's most profound questions. Questions of existence, meaning our place in the world.
Absolutely. And in Gass's modern, highly specialized world, fiction provided that vital, non-linear space for radical philosophical exploration that academic philosophy, bound by its own methodologies, often couldn't provide as easily.
Right.
For him, it was a profound way of knowing by making, of rigorously testing a philosophical premise by actively building a world according to its rules.
While Ion, living in his ancient, integrated world, seems to have seen art and philosophy as different yet complementary modes of articulating a single coherent vision.
A world where every act of making was inherently a form of expressing what was known, a manifestation of a universal truth.
Yeah, that dual perspective significantly enriches our understanding of both creative and intellectual pursuits across history.
It really does.
And both models, despite their profound differences in approach and context, powerfully demonstrate that the creative act of poiesis, that act of making and bringing into being, is an indispensable and potent form of philosophical inquiry.
Making as thinking.
Yet it fundamentally reminds us that to truly know something deeply, one must also often be able to make it, to construct it, to embody it. Which I think raises an important question for you, our listener. Where in your own life do you find those boundaries between making and knowing blurring? And what new possibilities for thought, for understanding, or maybe for creation emerge from that powerful fusion?
That's a great question to leave people with. We deeply encourage you to seek out the original sources we've discussed today, to delve into the intricate prose of William H. Gass, maybe brave the tunnel.
Maybe start with Omen Setter's Luck.
Good point. Or explore the evocative fragments of Ion of Chios and just continue your own journey of discovery.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration into the fascinating interplay of fiction and philosophy here on AI History of Western Philosophy.